I'm Eleanor Grace Carter. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've dedicated 62 years of my life to helping others as a social worker. On August 18th, 2023, my life took a complete 180. That day, I suggested to my daughter that we go for a hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains, thinking some time in nature would do us both good. Unfortunately, what began as an ordinary day turned into an event that changed my life forever. As we were descending a hill, I suddenly felt a sharp pain and collapsed. A hunter had accidentally shot me. I remember my daughter frantically trying to wipe the fear off my face as I bled out. But oddly enough, instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was like I was leaving my body, detaching from this world, and transitioning into a completely different dimension. At that moment, it felt as if my entire life, my deeds, my mistakes, everything I'd ever done, was playing before my eyes like a movie. Throughout my career, I had always strived to be a good person. Delivering food to the homeless, creating projects for women's shelters, and touching lives had been my purpose. But I have to admit, my faith in God never went beyond my actions. Spiritually, I wasn't fully surrendered. And for the first time, I questioned if that was enough. Then, before I could reflect further, everything turned to darkness, and I realized I was being pulled into a completely different reality. When I opened my eyes, it felt like I was being drawn into a forest. For a brief moment, I looked around, seeking the familiar calm of nature, but everything quickly changed. The air grew heavy. The trees faded into a void, and darkness engulfed everything. There was nothing in sight, no light, no exit. A cold wind blew past me, its eerie howling sending chills down my spine. I found myself moving. I didn't know where I was or where I was going, but it felt like an unseen force was pulling me. My steps led me toward a massive structure in the distance. It looked like Buckingham Palace, but unlike the majestic building I knew, this one was in ruins. It resembled a charred dungeon, with walls blackened and thick, dark smoke billowing from the towers. The entire structure seemed distorted, as though it was trying to collapse in on itself. In front of the door, there was a crowd of people. They were standing silently in a long line, their faces filled with fear and hopelessness. Some had tears streaming down their faces, while others stared blankly, their expressions revealing utter resignation. Somehow, I could feel their emotions. Despair lingered in the very air. As I drew closer, I began to hear screams coming from deep within. These were not ordinary cries. They sounded like the agonized wails of tortured souls. It was as if the sound was seeping into my very being. As I approached the crowd, I realized they were being dragged towards the palace. No one seemed willing to enter, but no one had a choice either. The scene was gut-wrenching. I could feel in every fiber of my being that something was terribly wrong, yet I couldn't understand why or how I was there. A cold grip seemed to clutch at my heart. Standing at the entrance were towering figures dressed like soldiers. They had no faces, yet their presence was overwhelmingly oppressive. Under their shadow, no one dared to speak. Everyone simply submitted. The people in line seemed to cling to the hope of reaching some kind of end, but I knew the truth. This place wasn't salvation. It was something else entirely. The screams echoing from within the palace were enough to confirm what lay ahead. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. It felt like an invisible force was holding me there, pushing me forward. As the air grew heavier, an intense fear settled within me. I sensed that this place was only the beginning. and there was more, much more to come. This darkness was not metaphorical. It was real, and I was right in the middle of it. As I got closer to the door, my fear escalated. The crowd seemed to be pulled inside by an unseen hand. No one could resist. No one could escape. I, too, found myself being dragged forward. I tried to step back, but a force pushed me onward. When I finally reached the door, everything changed in an instant. The faces of the people I saw entering seemed to fall away like masks, leaving behind lifeless, hollow expressions. It was as if their souls had been completely stripped away. When I stepped inside, a landscape appeared before me, a deep chasm, surrounded by flames. Everywhere I looked, people were chained. Some were crawling on their knees. Others had transformed into grotesque creatures with massive horns and deformed limbs. Even hearing their voices was unbearable. Moans, screams, and endless cries of agony filled the space. This place was a gateway to the deepest corners of hell. I moved forward. Or rather, I was forced to move. I wanted to turn back, but something was pulling me downward. It felt like a gravitational force beneath my feet, dragging me relentlessly. As I looked around, I saw groups of people, each bearing their own torment. The wealthy were cloaked in flames, their once opulent attire burning them alive. It was as though they were drowning in the treasures they once valued. But now, those treasures had become instruments of their suffering. I passed a group of young people clutching phones, their eyes glued to the screens. The phones seemed to emit a searing fire that slowly burned the flesh from their fingers. Despite their pain and the excruciating heat, they couldn't tear their eyes away. In another corner, I saw an old man chained and muttering about his past mistakes. Creatures surrounded him, hurling stones that struck his face, making him shrink with every hit. Each group's torment reflected their sins. But here, their sins didn't just burn them, they tore pieces from them. Their souls seemed to erode with each moment of torment, vanishing bit by bit. The creatures, embodying the worst of humanity, cracked their chains and dragged their victims deeper. These beings showed no mercy. They only amplified the pain and fear. I felt the same force beginning to consume me. My feet grew heavy, as if sinking into the ground. With every step forward, my legs seemed to turn to stone. Suddenly, a colossal door loomed ahead. It was ablaze, but its flames were blue and white rather than red. The screams from beyond it were more horrifying than anything I had heard before. The sound pierced my very soul, as if it were trying to tear me apart. I knew I shouldn't go through the door, but an unseen power was forcing me toward it. The creatures around me began to turn toward me. As they approached, they rattled their chains, trying to ensnare me. I resisted with my hands, but it wasn't enough. The chains wrapped around my legs, pulling me to the ground. "What am I doing here? Why is this happening to me?" I screamed, but no one could hear me. As the creatures dragged me downward, I disappeared into the darkness. Hope was gone. I felt destined to become part of this endless void. When the chains pulled me down, I found myself at the entrance of a narrow corridor. Cells stretched endlessly along both sides. Each cell held someone suffering in torment. Screams, sobs, and desperate pleas echoed from every direction. The weight pressing down on me made each step forward harder, yet I was being dragged further. My eyes widened with horror at the sights in each cell. The faces became disturbingly familiar, figures I recognized from history books and television. The figure in the first cell froze me in place. There, before me, was Winston Churchill, one of the most iconic leaders in world history. The charismatic man, known for his powerful presence, was gone, replaced by a broken and battered soul. Chains hung from his tattered clothes, pinning him to the corner of the cell. In each hand, he held goblets filled with a black, burning liquid. Each sip seared his flesh, leaving burns and peeling his skin. Yet he was forced to keep drinking, unable to let go of the goblets. The creatures around him mocked him, baring crooked teeth as they jeered, "The savior of the world, but who will save his soul?" Churchill's face showed a mix of agony and deep regret. His labored breaths and trembling moans echoed off the cell's stone walls, making the very room seem to shudder. Watching this scene weighed heavily on my soul. I found myself stepping closer to the cell without meaning to. How could this be? Why is someone like him here? I thought. This was a man who won a world war and changed the course of history. And now he was in this pitiful state. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Then Churchill's voice rose, cutting through the air. Amidst his groans, I could make out his words. "Don't you see?" he cried, writhing in pain. "Don't you see? I was just a man. Everyone thought I was a hero. But no one saw the darkness inside me. Back then, my pride blinded me," he confessed. I kept walking. A few cells ahead, I saw another familiar face, Princess Diana. But this wasn't the elegant, strong Diana the world adored. Her face was pale, her eyes void of life. She held heavy stones in both hands, while a creature kept adding more to her burden. Her shoulders slumped, her knees trembled, but she wasn't allowed to drop them. I heard her murmuring, "I made mistakes. I wasn't truly kind-hearted. I sought love from people and lived far from humility." As I was dragged deeper, I came across a different cell, unlike the others. A label in bold letters adorned its door. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. My heart nearly stopped. "This can't be Queen Elizabeth," I whispered to myself, but something drew me closer. The cell was dimly lit, the flickering glow of a dark flame casting eerie shadows on the walls. The sight before me froze me in place. In the center of the cell was a woman bound in chains. Her face was unrecognizable, worn, swollen from tears, and bloodshot. All that remained of her majestic royal attire was a tattered, filthy cloth. She knelt on the ground, crushed beneath the weight of her chains. Each link seemed to carry a reflection of sin. Hellish creatures circled her, stabbing her with their spears. With every strike, Elizabeth groaned in pain, muttering fragments of her past. I heard her sobbing. Her voice was hoarse, and the words struggled to leave her mouth. I had time. God called me, but I didn't listen. I had so many chances, but I ignored them. The creatures circling her whispered her sins, their voices blending with the infernal hum of hell. Yet her confessions rang clear. I was accused of exploiting my people. While I thrived in wealth, I forgot them, she stammered, her voice breaking with sobs. One of the creatures forced a crown onto her head, not a crown of jewels, but one of sharp thorns. As it pressed down, a wave of agony washed over her face. I claimed the throne as if it were mine, not God's, she moaned. I turned a blind eye to injustice to protect my riches. Every cruelty done in my name brought my soul here. One creature unfurled a scroll and began to read aloud. Mau Mau Uprising. Thousands of innocent lives lost, with your silent approval. At these words, Elizabeth collapsed to the ground. I was just watching, she whispered faintly, but the creature mocked her, continuing, You turned a blind eye to the torture of colonized people. Their cries brought you here. Another creature stepped forward, shouting, You could have preserved the future, but you chose the chains of the past. Yet another sneered, "You ignored God's call for the splendor of royalty. While others suffered, you lived in luxury." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face as the chains tightened with every confession. An angel beside me softly whispered, "No human wealth or title can save them here. Everyone here bears the weight of their choices." Elizabeth's every word echoed deeply within me. This wasn't just her story, it was a tragic reflection of how humanity strays so easily from God. Her cries, the rattling of chains, and the mocking laughter of the creatures would remain etched in my mind even as I moved on. I continued walking. A few cells away, I saw other figures from the royal family. Each faced a unique torment. Some screamed for their past decisions, while others were crushed under the shadows of what they had done in life. Here, there were no titles, no mercy. In one cell, I saw the spirit of Prince Philip. He sat as if on a throne, but it was engulfed in flames. Each burning moment etched deeper pain onto his face. The creatures circled him, shouting, "You were powerful in life, but here, you are just another prisoner." Suddenly, the demons turned toward me, and they began to advance. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and in that instant, I woke up. When I returned to the world, shaken by those moments, I knew nothing would ever be the same. My heart carried a heavy weight, but my mind held a newfound clarity. What I experienced couldn't have been just a dream or a vision. It was a lesson carved deep into my soul, a divine message that changed the course of my life. From that day forward, I strove to become a better person and to fill my life with spiritual purpose. Every morning, I thank God. This experience opened the doors of heaven for me. I now live each day with greater meaning, viewing the world and my spiritual journey in a new light. The darkness I saw led me to the light. Now, I know salvation is always within reach. It's our choice whether to accept it. This experience was my choice, and now my path is clear. I love you all, and may God bless you.